Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar entitled Building Better Employee Experiences, Unpacking the Data. We are absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Meaghan Biro from Talent Culture. Meaghan is a globally recognized HR tech analyst, author, speaker, and brand strategist. The founder of Talent Culture, she hosts #WorkTrends, a popular weekly Twitter chat and podcast. Her career spans across recruiting, talent management, digital media, and brand strategy for hundreds of companies, from startups to global brands like Microsoft, IBM, and Google. Meaghan can be regularly found on Forbes, SHRM, Talent Culture, and a variety of other outlets. We also have Topia's very own Steve Black. Since co-founding Topia in 2011, Steve has seen the company grow from a small London-based startup to an award-winning global talent mobility platform supporting organizations around the world. At Topia, Steve leads strategic initiatives leveraging deep industry, technology, and customer insight. An expatriate himself, originally from the US, Steve understands the challenges of moving abroad and is dedicated to ensuring that everything we do at Topia is in the best interest for our customers. There will be an interactive Q&A session towards the end of this webinar, so please do drop any questions into the Q&A functionality. And without further ado, I will hand over to Meaghan and Steve.
Wonderful. I am so excited to be here today. I'm hoping that there we go. Here's what we're going to be focusing on today. I am thrilled to be taking part in this webinar with my colleague, Steve Black, co-founder and chief strategy officer at Topia. We're all about building better employee experiences. Employee experience has often been viewed as the latest and not necessarily the greatest buzzy term, but it's anything but that. Topia ran a really interesting and pretty comprehensive survey on the nature of employee experience, and what the research shows is that we don't always hit the mark, right? And by we, I mean HR, which is the very field that is supposed to know this. But getting employee experience right makes an enormous difference in terms of everything. This is results to retention, from performance to teamwork. And in the times we're living and working in right now, we're discovering the power we have to shape and improve employee experience no matter where we are, because we've got the technology that truly facilitates collaboration and communication. We are discovering how HR tech in particular can either take us forward to push us forward or push us back, build alignment or foster resentment, right? So it's got this ability to do things in either direction. It allows us to get our work done, but sometimes it also adds a lot more busy work so that we can't. And I'm sure if you're out there right now, you're going, I hear this, right? We're also learning just how a diverse and inclusive workplace pushes us to be more effective and more creative. And that certainly means demographics, but it also means more than that. It means opportunities to expand, to travel when possible, to move, to take global assignments, and also to best support and manage the whole workforce wherever they may be, which may be scattered, as you all know, around the world. As we're going to learn, these three focal points all work together in a very reciprocal and dynamic way in today's modern workplace. So this is what we're focusing on today. I want to give you a bit about the big picture here. Among the revelations I learned as we were starting to create this webinar is that the study Topia ran found huge disconnects between what HR thinks employees prefer and what actually employees prefer. And while it was actually conducted right before the onset of COVID-19, and I'll get to that more in a moment, now that we're still in the throes of this pandemic, it's even more important than ever to understand what builds a positive employee experience, because our employees are under more pressure than ever in work as well as in life. And the more we can do to offset that, the better. In just a few minutes, Steve is going to be joining me to take a dive into some of the survey's salient points. We're going to be covering a lot of ground today, including some surprises. I can tell you it's not just about need office spaces, right? And that one, obviously, when we're talking about the lockdown, office space is becoming more and more important, of course, but it's not just about wellness. It's not just about social lives. It's not about employee satisfaction or actually any one single thing. But what it is taking a strategic approach to how your employees engages with your organization. Every touch point, every task, every issue, every teammate. It's about those moments that matter, interactions that matter, needs and wants that matter, and understanding how to provide things that actually matter to your employees, right? If we don't ask these questions, how are we going to know? That happens over the whole duration of the employee journey. It starts just as soon as you hire someone and start onboarding. The first time they interface with your software, the first task you give them. So it's really critical to understand the power and the importance of all of these little moments. And you can break these down and find out what's really happening and how employees really feel. And I think that is so cool. You want to ensure a positive employee experience because you're addressing, here's the key word, everybody, authentic needs, behaviors, wants. That can amount to a competitive edge if you're thinking about your employer brand, right? So this isn't, small stuff here. This is big picture. So get this, Topia's new benchmark study surveyed 1,000 full-time employees, either in the US or in the UK, who work in large enterprise companies, meaning companies with 2,500 or more on their workforce. And something I want to point out is that I have seen a lot of smaller companies working on employee experience, but larger organizations sometimes don't have that mindset or a way to really take in that full scope of the strengths and weaknesses in their own workplace. Another interesting point, the data was collected between February 25th and March 4th of 2020. That's shortly before the number of cases in the US rose to over 1,000. And this is according to the New York Times. So it gives us a true glimpse of the nature of employees as it was before everything changed how we work. I've already mentioned that the study uncovered a substantial gap between what employees want and what HR things they want. The gap covers a whole range of topics: technology, relationships, recognition, the role of managers, and more. It also talks about how employees versus HR rate employee experience. The disparity is startling. Get this. Only 17% of employees rated their company as providing an exceptional employee experience. And twice as many non-HR employees rate their company as having a poor employee experience than employees in HR departments do. I found that to be a little too startling for my taste, we'll put it that way. Okay, so let's start to unpack the survey. The universal question is this: what do employees want? Before we dive into the stats, I want to put this into perspective. And I'm going to frame these points as not only contributing to the employee experience in a truly direct way or not, but also having a very direct impact on engagement and most of all, retention going forward. And you are going to want to keep your employees. I know each of you do. Once the crisis abates, and I'm certain it will, it's just going to take some time, as we know, and we start seeing where the chips fall, it would be a shame to lose valuable employees because their experiences are skewing to the negative. So, what matters is critical, what matters to employees, and what doesn't. A key lever for engagement is being able to speak to the genuine preferences of your employees, not the assumed ones. And I think we make this mistake. We're human, I get it, right? In terms of a culture that aligns people and business, you got to get it right. Obviously, tech plays a vital role. One thing I've seen a lot with the shift to remote is that we're scattering our processes across a myriad of platforms and apps with very little integration. The problem is we are fracturing our workflow and our attention spans. And what happens when we need to repeat a task because it doesn't carry over? We're making more work at a time when employees have a lot on their plates already, or we are communicating over multiple channels while also conducting meetings on others. We've all heard about Zoom fatigue by now. I know I'm feeling it a little bit too. So the tech that improves employee experience is tech that's streamlined, it's straightforward, and it's really on the leading edge of capabilities, yet it doesn't add to the burden for employees, it eases it. There are two blind spots to the pivot to remote, right? And also to working through the crisis that I keep seeing companies land on. One is that there's amnesia regarding the power of teams. Teams are still front and center, the nucleus of productivity for most organizations. Remote teams are finding ways to collaborate and thrive, and managers and HR absolutely need to be mindful of supporting them. And the other blind spot is the chance to be considered for global assignments, the chance to move. We're not going to be locked down forever, right? Many companies and regions are opening up and returning to business as usual, albeit with precautions, right? Policies to keep everyone safe. But global assignments remain a great way within a career and within an organization. So pulling back from those opportunities, I think, is a mistake. On a very human level, you're backing off of providing hope, which we don't want to do right now, and tapping into your employees' aspirations when you scale back global opportunities. Finally, more than ever, we thrive in work cultures that embrace diversity and inclusion. We know that diversity and inclusion have a business case. Diverse perspectives and experiences all funnel to the best conclusions, the best strategies, and I think better outcomes. And part of that is being open to ideas, creating this fertile ground, this culture for everyone. And that's what builds and maintains the most positive workplace experience. It's not just a feel good, I really think it's a performance booster. Okay, so it's time for a pulse check. In the spirit of inclusiveness, I want to get the audience take on employee experience. So what do you think? What do you think your employees value most in contributing to workplace or employee experience? Take a look, and we've got some great answer options. All right. Well, thanks for weighing in, everybody. So get this. 9% of you said a great workspace and great perks. 0% said the latest and best technology and communication tools. You may need some more time, and we can always come back to you later, by the way. 14% of you said training and development opportunities. Here it is, everyone. 77% of you, a great culture of trust and empowerment. Thank you so much for weighing in on this. Appreciate it. So listen, I'm going to get over and start talking to my friend Steve here, right? Steve, hello and welcome.
Hello. Thank you for that great introduction to a pretty meaty subject here.
Absolutely. So tell us, what did Topia hope to gain from collecting this data on employee experience?
I think as we looked at the sort of conversations that were happening, in organizations over the course of last year, this topic of employee experience kept coming up, whether it related to mobility, where we spend a lot of our time, or just more broadly recruiting, development, retention, and more. And what we wanted to do with this survey was really unpack it a bit and get at the reality of both sides. What is it about employee experience that matters overall, but what does that matter to an employee, and how different might that be to what HR thinks? And I think once organizations can understand the true baseline, where are we really today, then we can start to build the right plan to make improvements. But what we've seen and what we'll talk some about today is when we're operating on assumptions, and I think you talked a little bit about assumed preferences, that's a dangerous game at times. We can be investing serious amounts of time, energy, not to mention money, in trying to move the needle in areas that actually may not matter so much. So ultimately, it was about shedding some light on a critical topic, and one that's even more important than ever, given the current climate. Employee engagement, it's gotten probably harder to do with everyone working remotely, but just as critical, if not more than ever.
And Steve, I do think the timing of the survey was ideal because we can't say that the data emerging from the study reflects the mindset of employees in the pandemic. But what we can say is that it shows HR wasn't necessarily on the right track. For instance, I found it pretty astonishing that only 16% of the employees in the survey say a great office space, food, games contribute to the employee experience versus 25% of HR pros. In other words, we can't think of office perks as a way to provide exceptional employee experience. That's not where the value lies. And again, this was pre-shutdown. So
Absolutely.
So from your perspective, Steve, what's one of the most direct examples of the perception gap between HR and employees?
Yeah, so I think, on that sort of timing of the survey point, I think if anything, COVID and people working remotely has made employee engagement harder, not easier, right? So if we had these gaps, before COVID, imagine, the size of the gap that probably exists out there right now. So I think in terms of the things that were really surprising to me, one, I think you mentioned there around this office perks, and, HR teams were, 50% more likely to say that was a key priority. And I think, perhaps it was for employees 10 years ago or so, as there was a sort of the race to free lunches and ping pong tables and whatnot in offices. And I think that's probably reached a bit of status quo. But for me, the real one that jumped out was, employees were twice as likely as HR folks within organizations to say that the employee experience is poor. Right. So worryingly, that's, where that the folks that are in charge of building the experience are much more confident in what it's delivering than the reality. And when you start with that gap in perception, it's a hard one to recover from. And then, as we'll talk through today, there were some somewhat unsurprising tactical ones of, hey, painful technology and internally makes for a bad employee experience. But ultimately, the thing that was maybe most interesting to me was this focus, and I think the folks in the audience hit it right on the head, that this ability to give an empowered and trusted workplace really is critical to employee experience. And if you can get that right, everything sort of else often falls in line. But if you don't have that trust, if you don't have that sense of empowerment, then, the house of cards starts to crumble a little bit. And in a world with everyone working from home, with the lack of those, hallway conversations or random encounters, over coffee in the building, that sense of trust, the closeness of those relationships is even harder than ever to maintain. So we've got a lot of work in front of us for sure.
Yeah, zero question. And the technology angle here is fascinating too, looking at the role that tech plays in employee experience. And we're seeing this play out right now in the workplace. But I was also seeing it pre-pandemic that we need to better leverage our data and insights to help HR make better decisions. And as far as using these tools, I mean, we're getting there, or are we? And I'm just asking myself, I'm going to ask you in the audience, right? Are we at a point where we are guiding or we are glutted by technology? And Steve, do we really understand what makes for a negative employee experience? And we want to hear from you. I know you're deep into the research, and does it change for different age groups? Because these all factor in.
Absolutely. And I think, I always draw the parallel back to, my personal life. You see maybe an ad for something, or somebody recommends a new app, you pop up on your phone, go to the app store, download it, and within seconds you've got it open, and you're making a judgment call on a new app in 30 seconds? Is it fast to load? Is it obvious what I need to do next? Do I like the look and feel of the user experience? And in our consumer lives, 30 seconds might be the full evaluation. We decide, no, that's not for me. And into the drawer of never to be used again apps, it goes. And I think that unfortunately, for many of us, that parallel doesn't translate to the workplace, right? We have an app, whether it's expense management or time off requests or anything else. Our company has chosen it for a variety of intelligent and thoughtful reasons. But if it's an awful experience from our perspective, we still have to struggle through it day in and day out. And I think it's that poor user experience, multiple touch points or applications to get anything done, and the inefficiency that it is felt by teams, were all major factors in ultimately delivering a poor and non-user friendly experience from a corporate technology point of view.
Yeah. I mean, tech is like that great promise and also a great conundrum, Steve, right? To so many of us. And when we look at the data, the study shows that there is a palpable cost to bad tech, right? Bad may not be the right word for me today to use, because the tech itself may be fine, but it's really how it's used and what it's adding to your employees' plates. That's not good. I was really struck by the amount of time and productivity wasted. Employees waste 40 million hours per month on HR tasks, and the estimated loss in productivity each year across large companies, get this, everybody, are you sitting down, seatbelts on, 8.15 billion, right? And there's also some really telling data about how many employees find HR tools easy to use. So Steve, these are the times when we all want to be as lean as we can. How are we missing the mark in terms of HR tools if only 41% of people find them simple and easy to use?
Yeah, it's incredible. I think on one hand, I'm sure that number has been trending up and up over the years. So that's probably actually an indicator of massive progress. But on the other side, right, 59% aren't finding them simple or easy to use. And I think, as I reflect even on our organization or the time I've spent with large enterprises around the world, oftentimes it comes from that sort of classic dilemma of investing in things for our customers, right? And investing in technology that has an obvious, quick bottom line impact. And the result of those two understandable prioritizations is that the tools that our teams use are an afterthought. Right. And as a result, I think it was 58% of employees feel like they're spending more time completing HR related tasks than they should have to, each individually wasting at least a half hour a month. And as you mentioned, that adds up to millions of wasted hours. And I think where we've seen, forward thinking and looking organizations doubling down on technology and investment to improve the employee experience, I think those folks understand that the reason employees stay with an organization, over a multi-year period, it's this cumulative sort of positive or negative set of experiences. And, 30 times a month, you're having a negative, even slightly experience with technology, that adds up over time, a little bit of wear and tear, and ultimately reduces that brand, employer brand of your organization. And so I think everyone has to really take a step back and think about each of those interactions, each of those touches, and are we delivering on the brand promise to our employees with just as much focus and priority as we are to our customers?
Yeah, zero question. Well, guess what, everyone? It's time for a pulse check. So I want to hear from each of you. How do you use the data and insights gathered from your HR tech? We've got a variety of responses here that are possible, right? Please weigh in. We'd love to hear from you. And this one should be fun to answer, right, from the audience, because insights and data are a pretty big deal, right, Steve?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been talking, it seems like for many years now, around the importance But I think as we're seeing from the answers here, we're early on that journey still.
Wow, look at this. 18% of you to track employee experience. 6% said to make talent acquisition decisions. 35% of you said to monitor employee engagement. 41%, we don't really use the data and insights from our HR tech. So interesting stuff.
And I think that's, it's great. You can always tell when you've got an honest audience, right? By the responses. I think, lots of investment over the years in HR technology, and lots of different tools and systems, and for a variety of different reasons, whether they're not integrated, as you alluded to a little bit earlier, Meaghan, whether it's the clunkiness of using them, or whether it's even the data that they capture. A lot of times it just sort of goes by the wayside and isn't really used to drive strategic decisions, though it's definitely an area of focus that I think we all need to help, push forward, because there's a lot of insight and opportunity that's maybe sitting there unused.
Mm-hmm. No question about it. And what I want to talk about next is the evolution of work, because the slow and steady evolution we were seeing before has radically shifted into high gear. We were all talking about work as a different concept, remote flexibility. They were already on the rise as factors in employee engagement and a more positive overall employee experience. And we were already acknowledging the importance of mobility, diversity, inclusion in tech. We were starting to discuss the prospect of project-based, team-based workplaces where employees came together for the duration of a specific project, formed a dynamic and collaborative team, and then they moved on. Or you took an international assignment for a period of time. We knew 9 to 5 wasn't necessarily the best model going forward in a global and very rapid-fire business economy. But now, wow, right? The study shows that as of the beginning of March 2020, we were already undergoing a paradigm shift. 50%, actually I will say 57% of the employees surveyed agreed that 5 years from now, there's going to be no such thing as a 9 to 5 job. I mean, that is just astonishing to me, because that means that career growth isn't hinged on blocks on a resume. It's about movement, mobility, a more agile way of working. Employees grow and develop at a pace of work, right? And it's not limited to the confines of a job that they need to sequester in for a long haul. So for organizations that can structure their policies and procedures to facilitate this kind of movement, I think it's going to be a real differentiator. So I want to ask you to think about this. If you're out there in the audience today, have we actually broken the mold of the centralized workforce? In the future, what do you think teams will look like? As we build our workforces for the future, we're going to want to pay close attention to these factors. Work is going to look very, very different than it used to. So as we acquire, we manage, we engage and support our workforces, we have to evolve as well. And I want everyone to just be mindful and take that in today as we're unfolding this topic. But right now, what I want to do is get the conversation back with Steve. And Steve, I do think we need to focus on global mobility right now, because there are some misconceptions about it. And I'm talking about the pandemic and shutting down, and about the issue of travel. But that's not really all global mobility is. So I want you to help us unpack this. In terms of global mobility, we're not all thinking globally right now, to be sure, right? But that's going to change. Do you think we're undervaluing the importance of international experiences for our employees?
It's a great question, and I think in many cases we certainly are, or we're thinking about global mobility perhaps in a somewhat narrower or maybe traditional way. 20 years ago, as a function and as a concept, it was really around a handful of really senior executives, frankly, on pretty lavish compensation packages, being sent around the world at vast sums of money to help open a new office or region or take a leadership position halfway around the world. And I think we've seen an explosion of use cases over the last decade where mobility now touches cross-border recruiting, or I've seen intern programs or campus hire populations where it's much lighter touch from a cost or investment perspective, but still just as important in terms of delivering on that employer brand promise and finding the best talent on earth, no matter where it is. I think also the COVID pandemic and the shift to remote work has, perhaps surprisingly for folks outside of mobility, has actually meant mobility teams are oddly enough busier now than ever before. And that's in large part because this complexity that comes with having all of a sudden 80+% of your employees working from home in many organizations, or 100% in others, that adds a level of complexity around payroll, tax, immigration compliance that traditionally fell within the responsibility of mobility teams, but when it was only 5 or 10% of your employee base. And so when Jack Dorsey at Twitter mentioned a few weeks ago that if you don't ever want to come back into the office, you don't have to, I think lots of folks heralded that as the sort of wave of the future and the end of the office and on down the line. But I guarantee you the mobility team and the rest of the HR team at Twitter were working through how on earth they were going to manage the compliance realities of employees all over the world, because sometimes working from home might be across city lines, state lines, or country lines, right? And there are significant tax and immigration complications or considerations, if nothing else, to factor in. And it was interesting on the backs of that. You sort of wonder how many other organizations are going to take that bold of a stance. And, is this just a startup mentality Twitter sort of move, or will we see more of it? And I think it was just this week, Siemens announced that for their employees, though they're not going to go quite as far as Twitter, unsurprisingly, but they're saying 2 to 3 days a week working remotely from home from a shared co-working space will be an option for their employees around the world, which, if you would have asked or thought about that question years ago, an organization as big and complex and perhaps traditional as Siemens, you would have thought that was impossible. But that does really, I think, suggest the seismic shift that we're starting to see. But with that shift comes, okay, now how are we going to manage this? How are we going to stay on top of it? And certainly as borders start to reopen, how are we going to get ready to get back to moving our people around the world? Because when you think about the cost and complexity of mobility, no one was doing it just for the fun of it. It's expensive, stressful, it's challenging. It's done in large part, right, for key strategic initiatives for the organization. And secondly, for key development of that next generation of leaders. You look at the executive suite, any large global organization, and it is full of folks that have had experiences around the world. And while this pandemic has taught us certainly that things like a virtual assignment, working remotely for a team across the world are certainly technically possible, I think the relationships that are built, the experiences had, the trust and cultural understanding of experiencing India in person and working from there and knowing what your teams there are going through is very different than working with an Indian team over Zoom, for a few months. So I certainly don't expect that mobility is going away anytime soon. It had a bit of a pause certainly this year with some newfound remote working complexity, but everything we're hearing from CHROs on down is there's just a building backlog of folks that are ready to move as soon as it's safe and borders reopen and everything else. So lots of exciting times to come, certainly still in the mobility space.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sage. And I know, Steve, both you and I are committed to diversity and helping employers build and retain diverse workforces. The survey brought up some interesting data on how much diversity matters to employees as well. And here's some key points. 79% of employees believe building a team with diverse backgrounds and viewpoints leads to more creativity and innovation. 1 in 3 employees believe that companies need to hire based on prioritizing diversity rather than exclusively focusing on experiences and capabilities. And 45% of 18 to 38-year-olds would prefer to work with a more diverse workforce. So Steve, the survey also brought up something called the diversity disconnect. in which employees are actually hindering parts of who they are because they're afraid it might hamper career growth. Can you explain that, and then how employers can possibly fix this?
Absolutely. So that stat was around the percentage of employees who felt that if their manager or colleagues understood their political beliefs, it would hamper their career. So it was 1 in 4 employees, and 44, so nearly 50% of HR professionals felt the same. So there is a real stress and struggle that individuals are going through around how do I balance what I believe versus maybe what I think my company believes, and manage that with my career. So I think it's a challenge, but I also think it's an opportunity, certainly as we think back to the mobility point of view and perspective, given the inherent diversity, experience, and opening of sort of minds and beliefs that come along with working with either yourself moving around the world or working with colleagues from other parts of the world more closely as well. And I think one of the things that's interesting about mobility and its role in the career life cycle of employees and the diversity across the organization is, to the point I made earlier around leadership teams being made of folks with international experience, the next generation of an organization's leaders will touch the mobility program at some point, often earlier in their careers. And where we've seen organizations, really pushing hard to manage diversity, to get ahead of it, to address it in that next generation of leaders. If you get diversity right in your mobility population, it then sort of seeds the growth of the next generation of leaders, inherently being a more diverse population. This is a pretty neat lens and impact that mobility can put on and have on helping solve some of the diversity challenge as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, listen, audience, you are still here with us. We're so appreciative. And I've got our final pulse check here. So, burning question: if you could change one thing about employee experience in your company, what would it change? And I've got a variety of answers here that are up, focusing on giving more autonomy and building trust, improving the HR tech we use, making sure employees have more access to global opportunities, and increasing our efforts to promote diversity. And it'll be interesting to see what you have to say. And the results are in. Okay, so 36% of you say focus on giving more autonomy and building trust. 14% weighed in improving the technology we use. That's interesting. 7% of you said making sure employees have more access to global opportunities. And a whopping 43% of you said increasing our efforts to promote diversity. So to me, this is really indicative of where we are at this point in time. I mean, employee experience has come so far in terms of our understanding. And it's clear that everybody out there in the audience is taking it seriously, but in different ways, right? Perhaps at different stages of the process. Maybe you're making those adjustments, which is understandable. It's hard sometimes to know which path to choose. So thanks again for weighing in. I think the bottom line we all need to pay attention to right now is that no employer can afford to make mistakes. Employee experience matters more than it ever has. And we're seeing how important it is to provide technology that facilitates communication and connection, that doesn't interfere with the workflow by requiring tons of extra steps. And we're seeing how relationships play a key role, especially now. We're seeing how quickly our employees have risen to the occasion and are willing to foster their own accountability with their experience, right? This is very positive. And when people feel supported and validated by their managers and part of their teams, they see opportunities on the horizon now for the future. And I think that's so important. And Steve, I just want to say a shout out to you for sharing your perspective also. I think some of the points you raised are really eye-openers, such as the fact that global mobility isn't just a matter of travel in some cases. It's a matter of better managing your workforce that's already global. And I think what we see in Topia's survey is that every touch point matters, and that negatives have a powerful impact on the engagement, productivity, and performance, and of course, most important and dear to me is retention. So based on the data, I'm going to take I'm going to give you these 6 steps, and they're action steps, audience, okay? Make sure managers and bosses are being fair and supportive with employees. And if not, see how we can empower them going forward. Number 2, unburden employees of all the countless tasks they now have to conduct and complete. Free your employees up. Number 3, don't pile on more tech tools. Make sure the ones you have are the right ones. Number 4, find the points of discontent among your employees. Ask the question. Commit to fixing them. Number 5, anticipate the team of the future and anticipate the shift to global. Then you can start strategizing how to provide these opportunities to your employees and new hires. And 6th, but not least, don't waffle on diversity. I think you're going to lose a lot of ways and people if you do. Employees want diversity and inclusivity, and workplaces that provide it are going to be far more appealing to candidates. So I hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. And, we're going to take some time to answer some of your questions now. So stick around, and thank you again. And thank you, Steve.
Absolutely. It's been great. I think, Holly, over to you for any questions that came in from the group.
Yeah, we've got a couple that have come in. So the first one is mobility still relevant with so little travel happening at the moment?
Yeah, it's a great one. So we touched on that one a little bit throughout. I think, for me, absolutely. One of the things we've seen is mobility teams, as the crisis was starting to develop around the world, got the spotlight from the CEO very early on around where are my people? Around where are they? Are they safe? Who's been potentially to a COVID hotspot, whether it was China or Italy in the early months, and how are we going to make sure that everyone is safe, looked after, and taken care of? And as we've seen the pandemic evolve, it has started to shift from stage 1 of where is everybody, what do we do, how do we get them home, to much more of now that everybody's spread out around the country or world, what do we do next? What do we do about those moves that were on hold? What do we do about this new world of remote working or virtual assignments? And I think it's been interesting to see some mobility teams really lean in to that sort of executive spotlight that was shining on them to really raise the importance and visibility around mobility and what it can do. And I think the final piece of the puzzle maybe I'll mention on that front is with so much great talent around the world being out of work, take Airbnb and their layoffs, and a recruiting team switching to job placement for folks looking for new opportunities, we're seeing a lot of cross-border global recruiting of that top talent. So, hey, they're great. Let's get them on board. They can start and work remotely from where they are. And then later on this year, we'll move them to wherever we need them to be. So a real interesting opportunity from a global recruitment perspective as well for mobility to support also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the next one, how does focusing on more opportunities for global mobility help to better build a work culture of diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think global mobility is really the cornerstone of diverse and inclusive cultures. Diverse representation builds empathy and provides increased opportunities for employees. And before the pandemic, we were a very global work culture overall, expanding our culture to allow for all these worldviews and perspectives. And I think younger employees want more opportunities for global mobility as well as more diverse workplaces. That 45% of 18 to 35-year-olds said they wish they worked with a more diverse set of colleagues is really telling to me. And in general, more than a third of employees said they would consider moving abroad. So these two factors are closely related. And I think it's part of being able to shift to shorter term project-based teams is that sense of mobility. Being able to travel, it's cool, right? You can travel, you can collaborate. I think it's going to be an incredible driver of a new kind of engagement we're going to see within the next 5 years. But again, I think we really have to go back to the basics and set up the infrastructure for a more fluid team, more diverse teams. And that's going to come from every direction of your culture. So.
Okay, and I think I've got time for just one more. So what do you think will be the greatest challenge as businesses emerge from COVID-19 health crisis, but still have to ensure the safety and security of their teams?
That's a great one. I'll maybe give my thoughts, and Meaghan, happy for you to chime in. So I think the biggest challenge coming out of this is going to boil down for me to data, data, data. So I think the exit from and I'm using air quotes there, the exit from COVID will certainly be, and we're already seeing this: stop, start again, plan, replan, open, close, and this really dynamic and complex landscape playing out locally, in hundreds of locations around the world. And I think organizations that have access to data to help make decisions rapidly have the mindset and processes in place for scenario planning, for agility, for flexibility, that is ultimately going to help organizations be successful. And I think without that waiting for certainty, it's going to be quite a while probably before we get that. So I think data is at the core of what's going to help manage through the rest of this process.
Yeah, true that. And also, I think leadership has a huge responsibility here because we're seeing how reopening too soon can cause a lot of problems. So, fully emerging from this crisis is, on the one hand, worth talking about, but we don't know when it's going to happen because it depends on a vaccine, right? But in the meantime, I think we have to support and protect our employees and enable people to support and protect their loved ones and their families as well. And that may mean we have to change our workday schedules, especially to assist parents, right? By giving them time to help their kids with homeschooling. I mean, it may mean that we have to allow our employees to choose where they want to work if possible in order to feel safe. And, we all saw that role anxiety plays in performance and engagement, and we've certainly been seeing it for these months. So I don't think that that's going to be going away, but I think the employee experience should be positive even as we make a transition back to reopening, but we need to obviously do it in a safe way for every single person. So